Could Hamas end up a casualty of the GCC crisis? Its funding and supplies are in peril as Gulf countries put pressure on Qatar to break with the Palestinian group. I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Hamas. Caught in the middle of the GCC crisis is Hamas. Saudi Arabia and its neighbors want Qatar to drop its support of the Palestinian organization. Otherwise, a blockade around the tiny Gulf nation is expected to continue. It's the classic one Gulf country's freedom fighter is another Gulf country's terrorist. So what happens if Doha capitulates? Could it be a big win for Israel, as Qatar claims it will be? Or will Qatar's emir stand up for what he thinks is a legitimate Palestinian resistance movement? Well, I recently went to the Gaza Strip and Doha to speak to Hamas leaders. A little bit more on that in a moment. But first, let's get the debate started with this report by Randolph Nogel.
Foes and estranged friends, Hamas could lose an important ally. The group governing the Gaza Strip has been drawn into the diplomatic dust-up unfolding in the Gulf. A Saudi-led regional coalition of countries has severed ties with Qatar, which provides vital support to Gaza.
We want to see Qatar implement the promises it made a few years back with regard to its support for extremist groups, with regards to its hostile media, with regards to its interference in the affairs of other countries.
Not only does the oil-rich emirate support social projects in Gaza worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but it has provided refuge to a number of the movement's political leaders. Ismail Haniyeh, who was recently elected the head of Hamas, has reportedly retracted his decision to move from Gaza to Doha. A number of Hamas leaders are reported to have already left Qatar.
Hamas is more politically isolated than ever. Its political situation is catastrophic. The isolation can be expected to last, as well as the economic blockade on the Gaza Strip.
Now the question is whether the group will have to succumb to bottleneck pressure building up not only externally, but from within. Israel is planning to further reduce electricity supplies at the request of Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the rival Palestinian Authority, casting the plight of Palestinians in the Strip as a consequence of the political divide among Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. Last month, Hamas unveiled its first updated charter since its original founding document in 1988. Many saw it as an attempt to slightly rebrand the group because it softened its language, distinguishing the state of Israel from its people. Some observers specifically point to its description of a Palestinian state, with borders existing on the eve of the Six-Day War in 1967. But Hamas's outgoing political leader, who resides in Doha, told our presenter Imran Garda in a special interview that the movement is holding fast to its political ideals.
Hamas is making choices and is trying new things, but remains committed to dealing with the conflict from a strategic point of view that fulfills its natural principles.
The group has renewed its founding document at a time when its future is uncertain. For now, Hamas has Qatar's continued support. But with so much political turmoil plaguing its strongest ally, will Hamas find itself a movement as confined and isolated as its people? Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by the director of the Institute of Gulf Affairs, Ali Al-Ahmed from Washington, D.C., from Riyadh, Saudi and Gulf Affairs expert, Mohammed Al-Qubayban, and Marwan Kablan. He's the Director of Policy Analysis at the Doha Institute. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ali Al-Ahmed, let me begin with you. The GCC countries, led mainly by Saudi Arabia, are squeezing Qatar, and this might be bad for Hamas. Is it going to be bad for Hamas?
It is bad for Hamas. Hamas made a huge mistake by basically limiting its options with to Qatar only. So the Hamas leadership has moved to Qatar, which is susceptible to pressure from Saudis and its allies, the Israelis and the Americans, and it has closed its Syria option. So really Hamas is now in the worst condition since its foundation in terms of its position, because after Qatar, where do they go? They don't have Syria, they don't have Iran, and probably they'll go back to Lebanon, but with Iranian control and influence.
Yeah, they could be a big Iranian question here, and we'll explore some of it if we have time later on. Marwan, what is the likelihood of the Qataris kicking out Hamas due to the pressure imposed on it by the other GCC countries?
I think the question here is not about the likelihood. I think it's about whether this is wise or not. In my opinion, asking Qatar to expel the leaders of Hamas would be quite unwise, because as your previous guest said, Hamas has no other place to go. In fact, there is no place in the Arab world actually to take Hamas. Syria is no longer a place that can be thought of. Lebanon is not an option. Jordan has expelled Hamas a few years ago. So I think the only place that would actually host Hamas and would very much actually like to host Hamas is Iran. Is this wise actually to leave Hamas to go back to the lap of the Iranians? If the Syrian revolution actually did something good for Saudi Arabia and the other Arab states actually was taking Hamas out of the lap of the Iranians, because Iran was using Hamas, in fact, in order to cover its sectarian agenda by saying, look, we are not sectarian. In fact, we are having Sunni allies in our axis of resistance, and that ally is in fact Hamas. Now, if you force Hamas to go back to Iran, I think you will be handing Iran, a very important gift that I believe the Iranian will be dying actually in order to have it.
Okay, Mohammed Al-Kubayban, why is Saudi Arabia pushing Hamas into the hands of Iran and giving them a gift, as Marwan puts it?
Not true, sir. This is not true. Now, let's not take it as simple as they were discussing it. It's deeper than that. We knew the Saudis, how much they were supporting, and I'm not going to talk about the history of the Saudi support toward Hamas. But Hamas has, unfortunately, a serious problem of not reading the change of the dramatic change strategy in the region. And unfortunately, Hamas put themselves to a corner where they become, or everybody is point their fingers to them as a terror group. And that's really, which is unfortunate thing. But we have to live with what we can fix. Now, please, let's just get back and sit and discuss one more point here. Now, if you're talking about Hamas, that they are neglected by all the GCC countries, or as my colleagues here talking about that they may go to Iran, I'm telling you, sir, who drove them to be in this situation is Iran themselves. Iran, as you knew, they are playing in a two role, trying to support the Shia sects in the peninsula, and now they are using the tone or the music tone by clearing the Jerusalem or supporting the Palestine case. And here what we have to look at it. Let's look at it. Who put the Hamas in this situation?
Okay, so you blame the Iranians for putting them in that situation. Allow me to come in here for a second. Having spent some time in Saudi Arabia, it's my understanding that many Saudi people see Hamas as a heroic resistance organization. The Saudi government calls them a terrorist organization. The Saudi government is squeezing them, and the Saudi government is essentially on the side of the Israelis when it comes to Hamas now. How does the Saudi government turn to its people and say, hey, these are terrorists and we're on the side of the Israelis?
Well, the Saudi government...
Sorry, Ali, allow Mohammed to answer that first, and then you can come in.
Oh, Mohammed? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Sorry, Ali. But this is not true statement, sir. And unfortunately, I want to just tell you that the Saudi people and the government, they are all synchronized as a mindset. Yes, we consider them as a hero to fight against the Jew, By the way, one thing maybe good about this Qatar and the other GCC problem appears, I like one thing happened, that maybe the Muslim nations will pay attention more to the Palestine case. That's maybe the good part of this clash. So let me get back again to your point,
but Mohammed, just one
So-
little word in there. Hamas now says they don't fight Jews. You said, they fight against the Jews. Hamas says they don't fight Jews. They have a new charter. It says they fight Zionists to occupy their lands. They've taken out all references to Judaism. What do you think about that? They sound very moderate in that respect.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe I misword.
Oh, I
so
see.
they are fighting the Zionism. Okay, Jew is a different term. But again, sir, let's talk about what was your point, that the Saudi government, how they convinced their Saudi population. I thought that we are well understanding that the situation here in the Arab Peninsula is getting difficult. Some, I'm not saying when there is no Saudi people, are still thinking that the Hamas is the hero people and they consider Hamas as the right and proper people to lead the government rather than Abbas government. Some people are this, but I don't think so that the majority. I'm not saying this, sir, just because top of my head. No, sir. I'm saying it because we've been hurted by looking at those groups, thinking that we are...
Saudi Arabia doesn't like political Islam.
We are not in their line.
Understood. Saudi Arabia doesn't like political Islam. Let me ask Ali Al-Ahmed, is there that synchronicity that Muhammad says between the Saudi government and its people? Because I don't think there is. What do you think, Ali?
Oh, I don't think there is. This is not a democracy. It's a complete and absolute monarchy. So whatever the government wants, the government gets. But a large section of the population did support Hamas initially, but that support has been waned due to Hamas behavior and also to Saudi government change. In the past, there was Hamas leaders visited and raised money in Saudi Arabia, but because of the pressure from the Americans and the Israelis, the Saudi government changed its approach. And because Hamas also could not follow the Saudi instructions when they had a deal between the Hamas and Abbas, because the Saudis wanted the Palestinians to be under one leadership, Abbas leadership. Hamas didn't want to do that because of their own, not because of Iran. Hamas has been always basically, they decided on their own, although the Iranians have tried, they gave them a lot of money. And Iran does have support inside Hamas, the military section of Hamas. But right now, however, the Iranians don't even trust Hamas anymore. So, or the leadership, the political leadership, Khalid Mish'al and his successor. So it's going to be very difficult for Hamas to find a place even in Iran. This is the worst situation, and I blame the leadership for their sort of almost selfish decisions to cut their arms in Iraq, in Syria, and in Iran, because now Qatar will have to give them up. They have no other option. The pressure is so great, great.
Let's see. I want to bring up the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are going to be a common thread throughout this program today. As was mentioned, I spent a bit of time with Khalid Mish'al, spoke to him. I asked him, we mentioned already the fact that they removed, the old charter had the words, Jews, they fight Jews and so on. That was changed to Zionists in the new document that they call it. They don't call it a charter. Also, references to the Muslim Brotherhood purged in this new document. I asked him if that was a sign that Hamas wants better relations with Egypt to try and end the blockade in Gaza. Listen to what he had to say.
I've no doubt that Egypt is a key player in lifting the siege imposed on Gaza and opening up the border crossing. So that's why we've worked hard to keep our relationship open with Egypt and visit them and reach an agreement in which they open the border and lift the blockade that Israel is responsible for.
Okay, so Marwan, we're talking about Qatar being squeezed by the GCC countries, the Saudis, the Egyptians and so on. But on the other hand, you have Hamas essentially reaching out to the Egyptians. They're telling the Egyptians, hey, we're playing ball. We're taking away the Brotherhood references. Yahya Sinwar, one of the leaders, went to Cairo himself. They've been trying to find ways and means. Could there be a silver lining for the organization here where the Egyptians will be convinced enough to ease the blockade from their end and maybe give Hamas a lifeline, Marwan?
Well, I think eventually they will, but before that, I think there is one point that we must agree on. It's really important to make it very clear. First of all, we are talking about Hamas. We are all here talking about Hamas as if Hamas is a terror organization, which is not true in my opinion. Hamas is not designated even by the Saudi government as a terror organization. The Saudi government cannot, in fact, designate Hamas as a terror organization. And Hamas is not also designated by the United Nations as a terror organization. There are a few countries like, for example, Israel, the United States, Egypt. Actually, they did designate Hamas as a terror organization, but the fact is Hamas never carried out any violent action outside historical Palestine or outside or against any party apart from Israel. This is why everybody, almost everybody in the region, considered Hamas as a resistance movement that is fighting for the liberation of the Palestinian people. Back to your question on Egypt. I think Egypt is a very pragmatic party here in relation to Hamas, because when Saudi Arabia asked, for example, Qatar to expel Hamas leaders from here, we are seeing Hamas leaders